Today on the Life on Books podcast, we're talking about Hard Rain Falling by Don Carpenter.
Raining hardly out.
It is quite hard. Is that?
I don't know. I might have just butchered the grammar on that, but whatever, however you want to phrase it, the weather is very apt for the book we're discussing today.
It is. Welcome back to the Life on Books podcast. My name is Tony. With me, as always, is Andy, aka Metafictional Meathead. So today we're going to be discussing Hard Rain Falling by Don Carpenter, which was the first read in the official Life on Books book club. If you would like to join that, leave a comment wherever you're listening or watching, or shoot me an email, tony@lifeonbooks.com, or send me a message on Instagram or TikTok at A Life on Books. We'll add it to the next one. Even if you missed the club and you want to go back and read the book, there is a great discussion there. We're hosting it on Discord currently, so you can go back and kind of follow along with what other people were pointing out and their feedback. I thought there was some great insight from everyone that participated.
Yeah, that the Discord was popping off, and there were some really great points and discussions being had.
Yeah, and unlike a lot of other book clubs hosted by quote-unquote influencers, we are not necessarily doing it by month. So a lot of people are like, this is the book of June and this is the book of July. We're not really doing that. We're just kind of picking books that we want to read, that we think our fans and friends will enjoy as well, and basically structuring it around how long the book is going to take to read.
Yeah, we got pretty lucky with the math on Hard Rain Falling. It was pretty easy to break it up into 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Each week being around a similar length or at least number of chapters. But we'll have books that are longer that we will spread out over a longer period of time. And I'm sure we'll have books that are shorter that we'll do over like 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah. So as always, though, before we dig into Hard Rain Falling, let's talk about what we're currently reading. Do you want to kick things off?
Sure. So I really the only book I'm actively reading right now after finishing Hard Rain Falling is Tree of Smoke by Dennis Johnson. I have to resist the urge to pronounce it like the character in Inherent Vice, Dennis.
Oh, right. Yes. Thank you.
It's spelled the same, and
Yeah.
Dennis Johnson. But you were pretty hit it pretty on the nail when you said it was my kind of book. I'm really enjoying it. I think I'm about 60% through. I'm in the like early 400s. So I'm really digging it. I know I had messaged you about how the Houston brothers in that novel are, at least Bill is one of the protagonists in Angels.
Yeah.
And James is featured pretty heavily too. So it's been really interesting to kind of read more about them, read more of them.
Yeah. When you told me that the other day, that definitely piqued my interest to read Angels even more. You've obviously spoken very highly of the book, but I read Tree of Smoke, and then when you mentioned that, I was like, oh, maybe I'll bump that up and read that a little bit sooner than anticipated.
Yeah, it's really driven my interest in rereading it, Angels, up a lot higher. You know, it's definitely a book that I wanted to revisit, but
It's pretty short too.
yeah, it's a little over 200 pages. But especially as more of the backstory of those characters has developed, with James especially, as he's around the part where he's finally starting to see some combat and is signing up for more training and probably a third tour.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely made me want to like revisit Angels, and whether, you know, Johnson like had Tree of Smoke. We were talking about this a little bit, but whether Johnson like had Tree of Smoke in mind when he originated those characters in Angels, or if it's something that happened after the fact. I think it's definitely going to add a lot of perspective to Angels. So I'm really, really excited to reread that sometime soon.
Yeah, and if you guys want to hear us do an episode on Tree of Smoke, I've already finished it. Andy will probably finish it soon. There's only a handful of books that we both read every year. And so we've obviously been looking for ways to just have deeper discussions about the things that we read. And so anytime that we've both read the same book, that makes it easy. Obviously, it's funny. Somebody messaged me the other day and they're like, oh, I love your videos on Instagram, but you think you could do like more deep dives? And it's like, well, it's not really a great, like Instagram and TikTok aren't great formats for that.
Right.
You can post at this point, you can post up to an hour on Instagram and I think 10 minutes on TikTok, but even still, it's just no one really watches videos that long.
Right.
You're not in the mindset for it, I don't think, when you open those apps. And so for me, as much as I like making content, I just can't devote making like a very thorough 10-minute or 20-minute breakdown just for like 200 people to watch it, and
Yeah.
so as you know, I was doing that on YouTube with video essays, and I'll probably get back to doing the video essay thing. But obviously podcast discussions, I think, are probably like the best format for that.
Yeah, totally. I would love to do an episode on Tree of Smoke, or if we both get around to Angels sometime in the near future.
Well, I'll just read Angels and we can talk about both.
Yeah, I would love to talk about both and Dennis Johnson. I will also make time to reread Angels in the near future. So,
I mean, based on Tree of Smoke, I can't imagine Angels is a super difficult read either.
No, it's not. So yeah, I've been reading that, and then I just want to throw out a few that I have recently finished that were really good. I mentioned it the last time we spoke, The Garden by Aidan Scott. It's very reminiscent of Cormac McCarthy and especially Blood Meridian. It's just a phenomenally written novel. It takes place in the American Southwest in the mid 1800s. 1847 is the year. So kind of around the same time as Blood Meridian, maybe a little bit later, when the war is between the America and Mexico is kind of winding down, but there's still a lot of violence and things going on. It's basically just these two characters kind of trying to run away from their pasts, and they meet up and they get intertwined, and it's just a beautifully written novel, and a lot of really interesting character insight, and then just the description of the landscape was great too. I read What Kingdom by, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure it's pronounced differently, but it's Fine Grable. She's Danish. A really short novel from Archipelago Books. It's about a woman in a temporary psychiatric care unit, and just kind of her experience there, and that was great. And then the last one I want to shout out was An Apprenticeship, or The Book of Pleasures by Clarice Lispector. Kind of one of her lesser known novels, or not as mainstream. It's kind of the closest I will probably come to a quote romance novel. There is a bit of a love story entwined there. It's about this woman who meets a philosophy professor, and they kind of start this quasi relationship. He's trying to help her, like they want to start a relationship, and he's trying to help her kind of figure out herself before she can commit to that kind of relationship. At parts, their interactions seemed a little bit like abusive to me, like he was kind of controlling her. But it's Lispector. The ruminations on existentialism and just human life in general were just incredible. So really great short novel. It's 140, 150 pages. So really good one.
Nice. Yeah, I also recently wrapped up a bunch of stuff. For a while, there was just like, I had so many books that I had started and were kind of just like slowly making my way through. And so I really, the last week really just worked on kind of wrapping everything up and getting like a clean slate. So I just finished Hard Rain Falling. Obviously, I just finished Vulture Capitalism by Grace Blakely, which is a new nonfiction, came out this year. And in that book, it's a pretty heavy critique of the prominent economic systems in the developed world. So the United States, Canada, the UK, and makes a very strong case for people think of capitalism as free markets, and people think of socialism as, or communism as, government controlling the distribution of food or money or whatever. And she makes a great case for that not being true on both fronts, and basically sets forth an argument that really strongly demonstrates that the economic system that we have right now that we call capitalism is really just corporate socialism, which isn't by any means like a new concept, but I think she makes just a really strong case for it. So I also just finished History, a Mess by Sigrun Palisdottir. I think that's her last name. She's a Icelandic author, and she has a few books. She's also a historian, but this was a work of fiction, and that was really interesting. It's about a woman who is working on a research project, and she thinks she discovers like the first known like female painter, and then it turns out that like the journal she was like transcribing from this person, like 2 pages were stuck together, and that's like what made it seem like that was the case, but that page in between like definitively proves that it was not the case.
Oh, wow.
And so then it just goes on this wild ride of like her essentially like having a mental breakdown. And the writing really does such an excellent job of kind of like describing those anxiety-ridden moments that we've all had, where like there's just 1,000 thoughts running through our head every second, and she just drew that just pulled on that idea a lot throughout the book, and it was a little difficult to read at times because there were these streams of consciousness, and it was like a stream of like anxious hallucinatory consciousness.
Oh, wow.
So some points I had to go back and like reread and be like, what, did I miss something? Or is this supposed to be like this kind of insane? And then the latter was the case most of the time, but the writing was really good. I thought she did a great job with just kind of like, just making you feel how it feels to be anxious. So if you're into that kind of thing, definitely a cool book. And I just started Hamas, From Resistance to Regime by Paola Caridi, who is an Italian historian. So she lived in Jerusalem for 8 years and conducted extensive interviews with people from Hamas and wrote this book. I believe that was in the early 2000s. And the English translation of it that I have is updated with like stuff from last year even. So I've only read the prologue of that book. And even the prologue blew my mind because it made me really realize that there's so much conversation happening online about what's going on in the Middle East right now. It made me realize that 99.9% of people literally have no idea what they're talking about, which is not like, of course, Tony, like people don't know what they're talking about on the internet. I think the difference is people will literally argue their point on this topic to the death, figuratively and literally in some instances, without even knowing like a fraction of anything about what's going on. And so I'm really interested to dig into that. I'm taking extensive notes on it, so it's a slow go for me. It took me like 2.5 hours to read the prologue, which was 15 pages. And then also this morning I started Mehmed My Hawk by Yashar Kamal, who is a Turkish author. I grabbed that at the Gray Matter Books sale.
Oh, nice.
It's an NYRB. And when I posted the video of the haul, multiple people on Instagram and on TikTok either commented or messaged me and said, like, that's the best work out of Turkey, like, ever.
Cool.
So I started that. It's pretty good. It's the dialogue is weird. It's very simplistic, but all the writing around the dialogue is excellent so far. Even the first chapter, I was just like, wow. I just put I flagged it because I was like, this is just like really beautiful writing.
Nice.
And it's about like a kid that runs away from home. He lives in Anatolia. I think it takes place maybe in like the 1940s, and he runs away from home because he's just like abused basically by his the guy that owns the farm that he lives on. So,
Damn, you're on a real tear lately.
yeah, I just sleeping better, man. You know, it's like when you don't fall asleep when you read, you can
Actually
for a
read
while.
more, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
I actually just picked up some reading glasses because I noticed that I've been reading so much that my eyes after a couple hours get tired. And strangely, if I hold the book a little further away, that helps. But I got some reading glasses, so I'm curious to see how that goes. So
What prescription did you get on them?
I just like picked up some cheap ones at the grocery store. I don't know anything about glasses or vision. I've never needed glasses or anything like that. So they had like different levels of strength, and they had a little like reading chart.
Yeah.
And so I just tried on a few. I think it was like the plus 1.5. I don't know.
I've looked into doing the same thing. I feel like every time I go to see them somewhere, like I'll try some on, and like even the lowest strength they have there is still like
Too much?
And I've just been too lazy to actually like look online for something lower than that.
Yeah, I kind of had a similar sensation, but I kind of figured like when I was in the store, I was like, well, my eyes aren't tired right now, so
Yeah.
we'll see. I mean, they were $15. If it doesn't work out, I'll just not wear them. So anyhow, Hard Rain Falling by Don Carpenter. Let's get into that.
Yeah.
I'll let you go first. What was your overall thoughts and opinions?
I loved this book.
Yeah.
I loved it. I haven't really posted anything substantial. I think the one thing I shared on my Instagram story when I finished it was that like it was just like repeatedly being punched in the gut
Yeah.
in the best way possible.
Yeah.
Like and as we get, I'm going to preface this, as we get further into it, like I'm just going to have a hard time talking about this book without spoiling anything. I do think, you know, not knowing what's going to happen adds to it, but I also, at the same time, don't think that, you know, kind of knowing some of the things like really takes away. Like I think even if you know what's going to happen, like it's still going to, you know, it's still going to be very heart-wrenching.
Yeah.
But I mean, just the sense of foreboding, like throughout the novel, like you know, there were these moments of hope, but like always in the back of my mind, like, how is this going to go wrong? Like something's going to happen. Like just kind of this anxiety of like I said, how is this going to go wrong? Like,
Yeah.
something bad's going to happen. I can feel it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of on like the edge of your seat, like waiting to figure out what it's going to be. But yeah, I mean, it was such a beautifully written novel. I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but like I stick-eat it like
Oh, wow.
crazy. I think I got to the point like I try to be like diligent, I guess, and like not, you know, oversaturate it and just like, oh, that was, you know, like mark everything, you know, pick my battles. But it got to a point where I was like, almost like every page, every other page, I was just like this. It was a line, a paragraph. Sometimes I think I like, you know, 2 paragraphs, like a whole page. Like I was just like, this is just fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think, it's definitely, one of my all-time favorites. Now I that I don't know if I think my top 10 is like actually 15, 16 books.
Right.
But like it cracked its way into the mythical top 10.
Yeah, I feel almost identically about the book as you do. I would probably say it's definitely the best book I've read this year,
Yeah.
and quite possibly one of the best books or the best book I've ever read, period. I mean, I don't think it'll trump my favorite book, Catch 22, as far as my personal favorite. But as far as how good the book actually is, just the writing and everything about it, I mean, it's arguably one of the best. What's shocking is that it was Don Carpenter's first novel, his debut. And I mean, I don't really think he's that popular of a writer. Like, I don't hear a lot of people talking about him. I couldn't even name another book written by him. Although he has a decent amount of works out there. And it looks like something was published posthumously in 2013, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah. When I was looking online at his catalog. And
When was this published?
I think 1966 is when it came out. I didn't really know what to expect going into it based on the cover and the title and the blurb on the back.
Yeah, 64, 66.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be maybe a little bit more pedestrian, maybe a little bit more like similar to kind of that early to mid 1900s kind of style.
Yeah.
But I was not really ready for him to go down a lot of the rabbit holes that he went down with some of the themes, as far as, and we talked about this in our Discord, gay romance and class struggle and violence. And it was just like it's crazy. The book's only 308 pages long, and it just covers so much ground.
Yeah.
Race relations. I mean, it's unbelievable how much is packed into this little book. And the cool thing about it too is it's such an easy read.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, like, on the surface, it's not like it's not the type of book that I expected to have as much of an effect on me as it did. Like, it's very character and narrative driven.
Yeah.
Which, not that I dislike that, but it's not something I like always gravitate towards.
Right.
As much as I stickied it and will continue to talk about how great the writing is, it's not like there was anything like dense or, I know I've used the term like pyrotechnic a lot. There wasn't anything like, over the top about the quality of the writing.
Yeah.
It was fairly simple, I guess, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And, like you said, it was an easy read.
Emotionally, it's not.
Emotionally, it's very difficult, and subject matter wise, it's jarring. But it, in terms of like the density, it wasn't.
Yeah, you don't have to work to read it.
No.
I'm a slow reader, and I could probably read it in a single day. I mean, we had broken up the book club into 4 sections, 1 section per week, so 4 weeks. And I believe this week coming is supposed to be
as of the time of us recording it, we still have a week left in the reading.
Yeah, and most everyone that's said anything in the group is pretty much done.
Yeah, I had to like force myself to not finish it sooner.
Well, that's the thing, is the first week I got ahead, and then I was like, well, I'm supposed to be one of the people leading this book club, so let me not do that. And I put it aside, and then everyone else like finished.
Yeah.
And so I was halfway through at yesterday morning, and I just finished it. I read half the book in a couple hours yesterday morning. So, and I'm quite a slow reader. So you could read it in a day if you wanted to. I think maybe one of our book club members did read it in a single day, or maybe over a weekend. And so it's,
I don't think I would be able to handle reading this in a day. I would.
I mean, emotionally, it would be challenging for sure. But
Yeah.
it's. I thought it was a page turner too. Like
yeah.
I wanted to know what was going to happen
Totally.
next. You do build up so much hope for the characters, and more often than not, are
For Carpenter to just crush all of it.
yeah. So, that I want to see. I need to be better about flagging my fiction reads. I'm quite thorough with my notes for nonfiction, but I don't do it as much with fiction. But I made a note of it in the group. I want to say it was in section 2. It was the scene where they're talking about the grandfather that pulled the shotgun on the kid.
Oh, that was
Do you have that marked?
that was in part 2, which would have been like week 2 or 3,
Okay.
I think.
Yeah.
I forget where in part 2 it was, but that was part 2.
Oh, here we go. Page 146. I knew I had called out the page number in the group chat. I want to read this. There's no real spoilers in that, because it's not really discussing any major characters. So they're talking about this guy that's in prison, and why he's there, and he doesn't really fit in because he's like older and like a well-to-do guy and not a criminal, basically.
Yeah.
So they said they got the story from the deputies. The old man lived with his son's family, and his granddaughter had been gotten pregnant by a boy, and there had been a conference of the two families in an attempt to fix the responsibility and decide what to do. At first, it was decided that it was the boy's fault for making the girl go all the way, which is a great phrase from back then. Then they blamed the girl for allowing the boy to take these liberties with her. They were only juniors in high school. And then both sets of parents decided to blame themselves for not raising their children properly. And finally, after much self-recrimination, it was decided that modern society itself made it impossible to raise children properly. What with the movies and television and violence, too much sex in the magazines and the way girls dress these days, and the old man who had been sitting in the background listening in disgust finally went upstairs to his room and came back down with his double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun and terrified everybody by pointing the deadly weapon at the boy and telling him by God he would do the right thing by the girl or the grandfather would come looking for him and would find him no matter how far he ran. When he found him, he would blow a hole through him, by God. The boy let out a scream and jumped through the picture window and cut himself pretty badly, and the boy's parents called the police right after they called the ambulance. It did not occur to them to blame the grandfather's actions on society, which I thought was just like the perfect last sentence for that whole passage. And the book is just full of stuff like that I really appreciated because this was written in 1966, and I can imagine a similar conversation happening now. It's like that trope of, oh, kids these days and society and TV, you know?
Yeah.
And I would say one of the major themes of the book is that balance between fate and free will, and that passage like touches on it a little bit there. You know, who's really responsible? Is it society? Is it yourself? So I thought that was that was one of my favorite moments in the book. And then there was another chapter pretty late on, maybe in the last 50 pages, where they go to the ocean.
Yes.
And
oh my God.
And they're talking about how the ocean, you know, makes him realize how big the world is and all that stuff. And
yeah, I think like probably halfway, 2/3 of the way through, I knew that I was going to love the book. You know, Carpenter would have to really throw in the towel for me to change my opinion.
Yeah.
And then it was going to have a pretty high standing among the books I've read. But the last like 40, 50 pages, when Jack is kind of trying to repurpose his life after getting out of prison, which he goes to prison. It's not a spoiler. It's on the back of the book. Trying to correct himself and live a quote good and meaningful life. But yeah, that passage when they go to the ocean, like that was one of the ones, like that feeling of anxiety and foreboding that I was talking about earlier. Like it just, I got so tense reading that, but like it was such a jaw-dropping passage. Like he kind of balancing those emotions of like, that hopefulness of him, like, like you just said, like seeing how big the world is, and but kind of almost like looking over my shoulder, like what's coming next.
Yeah. So I forget where I had read this, but Carpenter has, been called the American Dostoevsky, who, I'm not a fan of really, but I didn't think the writing itself was Dostoevskian. However, what I did think was very similar, which Dostoevsky is known for, is Dostoevsky is really known for being able to understand and articulate the human condition, the human psyche, the contradictions of people's thoughts and behaviors. And I thought in that way, Carpenter is on the same level, perhaps better. It's a matter of opinion, of course, but there were so many things in the book where I was just like, wow, this guy really is aware and understands like what it is like to be a human being.
Yes,
which is
100%.
Which sounds silly when you say it out loud, but so many people walk through life without really ever articulating to themselves what their problems are or what they're feeling, or they're just not aware of how they appear to others and of their own wants and desires. All the descriptions about marriage and the struggles with like those relationships. Anyone that's been in a long-term relationship has probably felt something similar to that at some point.
Yes. Yeah. Again, without trying to not spoil anything, like I was having this conversation with someone on Instagram. Actually, it was the Ghostly Fop. I mentioned him when we announced this was our pick, because him posting about it was what made me really want to pick this up, and suggested it for my first our first pick. But that, and apologies for the brief spoiler here, but like that whole passage of Jack getting into a relationship post prison, and it kind of the ups and downs of that, having just like recently got out of a long relationship myself, and kind of having gone through some of those struggles, like that whole section was just like heart-wrenching. Like it was just like I could connect with that so much, and Carpenter captured those feelings and emotions so beautifully.
Yeah.
So
there was a kind of another recurring, not necessarily a theme, or maybe I guess you could call it a theme, that I know people in real life that have fallen into this trap of like, I just need this one thing.
Yes.
And then life will be good.
Yes.
And you see, I see that happen all the time with people who are unhappy, or there's something that's bothering them, or they're dissatisfied with, and then they just rush into a relationship or a new hobby or a new job, or just something that they think is like what they need. They move. Like that's a big thing.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm dissatisfied. New Hampshire sucks. I'm going to move to California. I'm going to move to wherever, Texas, Austin. And it's just like when you get there, you're going to be the same person you are here.
Right.
If your life sucks here, I mean, this is like statistically one of the best places in the country to live. You know what I mean?
Right.
So, and don't get me wrong, like if you don't like where you live, sure, move. But a lot of people aren't dissatisfied with where they live. They just think that going somewhere else is going to fix whatever is broken inside of them. And it's like, well, no, the problem is you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Before we get much further, I have a couple of quick passages I wanted to read. These are from like right before that scene where they go to the ocean. And I think both of these kind of really capture a lot of the comparisons to Dostoevsky and how Carpenter, like you said, captures what it means to be a human being. So this is kind of talking about Jack. He had seen enough of the emptiness of life to last him forever. He did not fool himself into thinking his life had been wasted. No, that was not it. Just that he thought he was through with the emptiness. It was time now for the rich part. He felt naively that he was entitled to it. He had worked for it. He had thrown more than a quarter of a century into the earning of it. He even reasoned, a little smugly perhaps, that people who hadn't been dragged through the mud as he had, and by that he meant people who hadn't dragged themselves through the mud, hadn't seen society and man at its worst and his worst as he surely had, were missing the really rich pleasures of life because they had nothing to compare them to. Having your own apartment, for example, might be pretty interesting to the ordinary citizen, but it could never be as vital as it was to Jack, who felt an actual pleasure at the sense of paying for his own walls that he could get out from behind any time he wanted. He also felt, again, a little smugly, that his life had given him a better understanding of some of the works of literature that he was now conscientiously plowing his way through, because he had felt some of the things they described, and he had not yet worn out the pleasures or forgotten the pains of life, which was supposed to be what literature was about.
Yeah, that's, again, so poignant. I think that it really highlights a couple things for me. Number one, one of the major themes is class struggle, in my opinion, in the book. And it's really kind of highlights the idea that, what makes you happy is very relative to your previous experiences, right? So for somebody that's been to prison, having your own apartment is like, amazing.
Right.
In 2024 in America, most people are pissed to be living in apartments and would rather have a house.
Right.
But it's very difficult to buy one right now. And so, we see that as a failing of our economic structure, which, it is. But I actually had a similar thought this morning when I started Mehmed My Hawk. So in the very beginning of the book, the first chapter is maybe like 3 pages. So the second chapter, when the boy runs away from home, it's not really a spoiler, it just happens right in the beginning. He gets taken in by this family in another village, and he's like overjoyed because he has like a mat to sleep on the floor, and there's like, a fire with some soup. It's just like, if we went to a place where we slept on a dirt floor by a fire, we'd be like, whoa, we really roughed it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And that was like a luxury to this kid in the book,
Yeah.
which was probably very true to how those people live or did live. And so it's just kind of funny, like when you think of it that way, it's like people in that part of the world couldn't even imagine a house like this, which is a very modest home,
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I thought that was touched on a lot throughout the book, and Carpenter did a great job of that.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of, like you've been saying, class struggle, and I think also kind of a mix of that and what you were talking about earlier about people trying to reach for the things they think they need to be happy.
Yeah.
I think that kind of, not necessarily juxtaposition, but the difference between how Jack and Billy go about their lives.
Yeah.
Like, Jack has this very attitude of like, that I don't want this, like, I don't want the American dream life, the house, the white picket fence, the steady job. Like, that sounds like a prison in and of itself. And he kind of struggles to make his way. And like from that passage I just read, drags himself through the mud. and falls down and ends up in prison and kind of gets stuck in these other prisons, both legitimate and metaphorical. And then Billy kind of runs into the same thing of like, he goes after these things that, not necessarily that he thinks like he needs to do, but he feels like, okay, this is the next phase of my life. And it's still like, it isn't enough. There's that yearning for something else.
Yeah.
To kind of, to provide value and satisfaction and fulfillment. And I think you have that class level on the surface level, and Carpenter definitely touches at that and gets deeper into it. But beyond that class struggle, you have these characters who, as they're struggling through the bigger issues of society, like they're still trying to find meaning in their life.
Yeah.
And struggling and failing and succeeding and failing again and just trying to make their way.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the hedonic treadmill effect. Again, like what I really appreciated about the kind of spotlighting of the differences between economic classes was that Carpenter did a great job of showing that ultimately everyone's problems are fairly similar.
Yeah.
And that obviously more material possession or material wealth doesn't really solve the existential problems of life.
Right.
So again, without giving too many spoilers, there's a wealthy character in the book who thinks that he wants this younger hot woman and blah, 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 blah. And then ultimately it's like, oh yeah, he's
right.
wants out just like, these other characters wanted out of their relationships.
I think you see that in one of the other kind of characters in that well-to-do circle, the one that Jack has a brief altercation with.
Oh yeah, at the bakery.
Yes, yeah. And one of the other characters from that crowd who just kind of, I don't remember if it's one of the ones that continues to come up, or if it's just someone who's there for this altercation and then is never heard from again. But I think the line was like something like, you don't have to worry about him. He just wants to feel embarrassed.
Yeah, he wants to be humiliated. I think it was, yeah.
And it's just like, this guy has more or less everything. He's got a comfortable life.
Right.
He's set financially. They've got the Rolls Royce. They're, just kind of out yucking it up every night. They're drinking, they're partying, they're on paper, they have this great material life, and he's not satisfied with it.
Right.
He wants to feel beneath what he is to try and feel something and get something out of life.
Right.
And again, that comes back to the passage I just read. Like, this guy doesn't have an appreciation for anything that he has because, and I think they say he's a lawyer, but like,
yeah,
there's really no mention of like how he got there and how he got his wealth. You can assume based on the character, like it was more or less, handed to him. He probably came from a wealthy family and had some, what we would now call privilege.
Yeah.
To get him to where he is and this comfortable life. And he doesn't appreciate any of it because he never had to struggle to earn anything. He never had to drag himself through the mud. He just, so he has to feel humiliated and embarrassed by getting into a fight outside and getting into a fight and knowing he wouldn't win outside of a bakery when he's hungover.
Yeah.
To try and feel something so he can go home and be like, oh, I got my ass kicked, but I rode home in a Rolls Royce and I have this cushy apartment or house or whatever he lives in.
I mean, I've known people like that in real life. And I think that's something that people complain about a lot is like more privileged people kind of using or trying to participate in the experiences of less privileged people it's kind of like performative and almost like a form of entertainment. Maybe the person genuinely thinks like, I want to go on a spiritual journey or whatever people say, but in reality, it's just like, yeah, for you, it's like a weekend getaway to rough it in my lifestyle, but this is my everyday reality.
Right, right.
So it's interesting in that way. Yeah, I mean, there's just so much to unpack in this book. It is really hard to dig super deep into it without giving much of it away.
I think it's a little reductive of the point at whole, but I think a lot of the character development throughout the novel, and especially the last third or so, part 3, after Jack is out of prison, it just shows that like that happiness and appreciation for life has to come from within.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was really anticipating a novel about, I thought it was going to be a little bit more like self-centered white guy thinks he's the center of the universe, thinks his thoughts are so original and brilliant.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that at all. And yeah, I didn't really, I guess, know what to expect, but it was just a really big surprise overall. It was fantastic. A couple of people had mentioned, some other authors that it was reminiscent of. I think somebody said like Jack Kerouac.
Yeah.
Whose writing I'm not super familiar with. Did it bring to mind any similarities to any other authors that you've read? Because for me, I didn't think stylistically it was too similar to anything that comes to mind.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Maybe a little bit now that I'm like actively thinking of, obviously the similarities between him and Dostoevsky do come to mind. It's hard to not kind of compare the two, especially when like the meaning of suffering or what you get out of your suffering is such a cornerstone of Dostoevsky's work. And at least this novel, I'm not familiar with the rest of Carpenter's work, but I'm going to assume he comes back to that. I was kind of expecting, particularly because of this blurb on the back, kind of, it calls it a beat era book of disaffected young men devoid of on the road euphoria. Like I was kind of sort of expecting it to be a little bit more like Beatnik-ish.
Mm-hmm. Same, yeah.
Which I think it is, the quote continues, devoid of on the road euphoria. Like it doesn't have that. I think it has some of the similarities of some of the like kind of beat era books of like, of these just like young men kind of like trying to figure out life and their place in it. But compared to like Kerouac and I don't think I've read, I guess, Been Down So Long It Looks Like Up to Me is kind of a beatnik book, but compared to those two, like it doesn't have that like hopefulness.
Mm-hmm.
This word euphoria is perfect. Like it doesn't have that like.
Whoa! Did you know Carpenter committed suicide?
Nope.
Wow, I didn't either. I just looked at his Wikipedia because I wanted to see his bibliography. Committed suicide on Thursday, July 27th, 1985, in his quote-unquote tiny cluttered apartment in Mill Valley, California. That's insane. I got to look more into that.
That makes this book even more depressing.
Wow. How old?
Dude.
How old was he? He was, let's see. I'm terrible at math.
What year was he born?
He was 31. He was 64. That's pretty old to off yourself. I mean, normally at that point, it's not unheard of, obviously, but like normally at that point, any serious mental illness has presented itself and become managed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I understand that he's from an era where treating it wasn't that as common, but I mean, it was 1995.
Yeah.
Like, wow. That's okay. So
I do think, like I was starting to say, now that I'm kind of like actively thinking about it, stylistically, there's a lot of differences, but I think thematically, there's some brief overlap between Carpenter and someone like Krasznahorkai, kind of on the like melancholic and darker side of humanity.
Yeah.
But I think that's about really all I can think of. Nothing really like stuck out to me while I was reading it. Like, oh, this is exactly like this author or.
Yeah. The writing was like, it's hard to describe because as we talked about, it's not dense. It doesn't make you work. I maybe only had to look up maybe one or two words. And I think one of them was like just something that it's just, we don't use. It's not, it's not our lexicon.
It was more like jargony stuff from that era
right.
than anything else.
However, it flowed really, I thought, easily. The dialogue felt so real to me. All right, so let's look at his list of works. So he actually wrote quite a bit. The only other book other than Hard Rain Falling that has a Wikipedia page, or it's not even a book, it's a screenplay, in 1972, Payday. So the fact that he's got a dozen works here and none of them have a Wikipedia page shows you how obscure his career was, which is like shocking to me because this book is incredible. So Hard Rain Falling in 66, Blade of Light in 67, The Murder of Frogs and Other Stories in 69, which is short stories, Getting Off in 71, which was a novel, Payday in 72, which was a screenplay. This must have been turned into a movie if it has a... It was. So, okay, so I'm going to watch that this afternoon.
Who's in it? Or what year was it?
72. I'm not super familiar with like 70s cinema. Payday is a 1973 American drama film written by Don Carpenter, directed by Daryl Duke, starring Rip Tom as a country music singer. Other members of cast include Anna Capri, Elaine Halevale, and Michael C. Gwynn. I don't know any of those people. The picture was filmed in and around Selma, Alabama. Let's see. Did it win any awards or anything? Doesn't look like it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it. Oh, here we go. Reception. The New York Times called it brilliant, a nasty little chrome-plated razor blade of a movie. Okay.
Sold.
Yeah. All right.
Chrome-plated razor blade of a movie. Whew.
Yeah. I mean, that's like a chrome-plated razor blade is how you could describe Hard Rain Falling, right? Like it's got some moments of flash, but ultimately it's going to cut you.
Yeah.
All right. So going back to his body of works, The True Life Story of Jody McKeegan, which was in 1975, which was a novel. Charles Bukowski's Post Office, a screenplay in 77. I've never heard of that. It has no Wikipedia page, so I don't think it was turned into a movie. Is that a thing? Charles
Bukowski's
Post Office? That's the name of the screenplay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Because Bukowski has a book called Post Office. I wonder if Carpenter adapted it to a screenplay.
Maybe. I can't tell you because there's no Wikipedia page. There's no link for me to click to learn more about it. A Couple of Comedians in 79, which was a novel. Snyder, Wallen, and Welch Together, which was a 1981 magazine article. Turnaround, which was a 1981 novel. The Class of 49, which was a 1985 novel, and 3 stories. Okay, that's kind of weird. The Dispossessed, which was a 1986 novel. I mean, he was cranking out work pretty good here.
Oh, that would... Someone... I'm laughing because someone sent me a message after I posted about this that I should read The Dispossessed, and I got totally confused because that is a well-known novel by Ursula K. Guin that I had in my shopping cart.
Is that how you say her name?
I don't know.
Oh, I always thought it was Le Guin. But
I don't think there's a Le. I think it's just Gein.
let's look.
I could be wrong.
I mean, I could be wrong as well. I don't know. I'm terrible with names. Yeah, it's Le Guin.
Oh, okay. Le Guin. Yeah, I was wrong. Well, I hope that's a good book because I just ordered it.
The Ursula K. Le Guin one?
Yeah.
I have The Left Hand of Darkness on my shelf, but I've not read it. But that, like, she's considered like
Yeah.
a top tier
Yeah.
writer. Okay, back to Don Carpenter here. There's a couple more. So The Dispossessed, 1986. From a Distant Place, which was in 1988, which was a novel. And then Fridays at Enrico's, which he wrote between 93 and 94, and it was just published in 2014.
Wow.
So I'm on a book buying ban. It's not going well.
Same.
I'm probably just gonna like order all of these if I'm honest. Like this, I've literally never seen any of his books in a store other than this,
yeah.
and this probably just because it's NYRB.
Yeah.
And so like at Gibson's bookstore, I think is where I got this. They have an NYRB display,
Yep.
and I'm like Hard Rain Falling. That's a cool title. It's got a muscle car on the front of it.
Right.
So that I read the blurb. I was like, this sounds cool. That's why I grabbed it. Man, I feel so bad that
I feel bad too. I'm not totally surprised that he didn't get as much publicity. You know, especially if this at the time of publication was like also getting that comparison to the other Beat era authors.
Yeah.
Granted, I haven't read much of their work outside of like On the Road, and like I said, you could loosely tie in Farina's novel to it, but I think that era of writing or that kind of subgenre of novels just like had so much hope for the future. You know, at the surface, it was just young men like and women f***ing around on the road and just kind of having a sort of hedonistic lifestyle.
Yeah.
But like there was still like hope and kind of positivity towards life
Yeah.
versus this, which is just more or less the opposite of that. And it would not surprise me if like when this came out, someone was like, oh, it's like On the Road.
Yeah.
And then someone read it and was like, nope.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. And then it just
This is
kind
a
of
chrome-plated razor blade.
right. And then it just kind of like fell off from there.
Yeah.
It's a terrible injustice, but like it wouldn't surprise me if that's how it went.
I think part of it too is in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s is when you really saw that kind of cliche white American dude author like the Philip Roths and all that kind of really like boom big time. I mean, you know, look, white men have dominated American literature always.
Yeah.
We weren't exactly, you know, doing our part to help promote women writers through the 19th century. But I do think that a lot of times people just kind of like roll their eyes, like Don Carpenter, like that sounds like another white dude. You know what I
Right.
mean? And I it's incredible. I get comments all the time on content that I post about that kind of idea. When I had posted my bookshelf tour, someone was like, so like 2 books by women. And it's just like, well, actually I went back. I was annoyed by that. So I went back and I was like, nope, 1/3 of my books are female authors.
Yeah.
And a video that's blowing up right now on my social media is like the 5 books that would make me be your friend if I saw you reading in public. And on TikTok and on Instagram, people were like, where are the women authors? It's like, there's 30 million books, literally, or something like that. You know, millions of books have been published. I'm talking about 5 of them.
Yeah. Right.
You know, it's like, go look at any of my other content. There's plenty of women featured. And it just, I think that because of that, it kind of works against. And don't get me wrong, I think white dudes have by and large been a privileged class throughout history. However, it's probably working against someone like Carpenter.
Yeah.
Maybe not so much when the book was published, but certainly as people go back through time
Yeah.
and read classics.
Yeah. I could imagine too, more so around its publication in like the decade or two after, kind of that material, idealistic American lifestyle of the house, the nice fence, the car, the steady job. If you picked up this book and failed to read between the lines, like it does kind of criticize or at least malign those things,
Yeah.
So I think at a time when that kind of lifestyle was like really starting to become prominent and idealized and, was kind of the brass ring that everyone was striving towards, for someone to be like, nope, that's not the answer.
Yeah.
That probably could have affected its standing as well.
Yeah. We should probably tell people, I mean, if you've made it this far, you listen to us babble about it, you probably read the book. But I was shocked by the volume of the N-word in the book. So trigger warning, or just general warning, I guess, for people. It's funny, people say things like, oh, they could never make that movie these days. It's like, you probably couldn't write this novel today as a white guy. But it's, I think, added an important layer of authenticity to it. Because, I mean, in 1966, like, race relations was a big topic. So I think, giving the characters the authenticity to use that language, really, I think making the characters use that language gave it a lot of authenticity to be representative of what was actually going on and how people treated each other and spoke to one another.
I think that authenticity just adds to the complexity of the class struggle discussion within the novel.
Yeah. So anyway, I think we've probably covered most of what we can without giving too much away. Highly recommend it. 5 stars for me. I
Absolutely.
will definitely be reading more from Don Carpenter. Let's pivot into talking about our next book for the Life on Books book club. You want to correct that off?
Yeah, so this is from Open Letter Books. It is Fox by Dubravka Ugresic. She's Croatian.
Cool.
I've never read anything Croatian. Have you?
Let me check. I actually started keeping better track because I was like, well, Tony, if you're trying to read one book from every country, you might want to write them down, which countries you've read from, you dummy. So let me pull up my spreadsheet here, but I do not think I have. You want to just read the blurb?
Yeah. With characteristic wit and narrative force, Fox takes us from Russia to Japan through Balkan minefields and American road trips, and from the 1920s to the present, as it explores the power of storytelling and literary invention, notions of betrayal, and the randomness of human lives and biographies. Using the duplicitous and shape-shifting Fox of Eastern folklore as a motif, Ugresic constructs a novel that reinvents itself over and over, blending nuggets of literary trivia, like how Nabokov named the neo-nympha Dorothea Butterfly after the woman who drove him cross-country, with the timeless story of a woman trying to escape her hometown and find love to magical effect. Propelled by literary footnotes and minor characters, Fox is vintage Ugresic, recovering the voices of those on the margins with a verve that's impassioned, learned, and hilarious.
Okay. Well, sounds cool. To call it vintage Ugresic is interesting to me. It's like, oh, we supposed to know what that is?
Yeah,
like,
I don't
know if how many books she has translated to English. So
see.
To answer your question, no, I have not read anything from Croatia according to my spreadsheet. I own 2 books from Croatian authors, Fox and On the Edge of Reason by Miroslav Krletsa. I don't know.
I don't know how many of them have been translated into English. I'm going to assume all of them because they all the titles are listed in English.
Okay.
But there are 12 other books
Oh, wow. Okay.
listed. Some fiction and some collections of essays. Looks like a pretty even split, 6 and 6. But yeah, it's pretty much pagination wise, it's the exact same length as Hard Rain Falling. So
She passed away last year.
oh wow.
Yeah.
I would say we'll probably aim to do this over 3 to 4 weeks as well, but we'll have specifics on that soon.
Yeah, so you'll probably be watching this this is going to be posted on Wednesday the 12th. And so do you want to aim to start the next round of the club on the 22nd? Give people a week and a half to get started
Yeah, we can do that.
to acquire the book.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know anything about her really as a writer, other than she passed away last year. She was, how old was she? 73. Looks like she lived in the Netherlands, and that's where she passed away. And, politics and exile. So at the outbreak of the war in 1991 in former Yugoslavia, Ugresic took a firm anti-war and anti-nationalist stand. She wrote critically about nationalism, the stupidity, and the criminality of war, and soon became a target of parts of the Croatian media, fellow writers, and public figures. She had been accused of anti-patriotism and proclaimed a traitor, a public enemy, and a witch. She left Croatia in 1993 after a long-lasting series of public attacks, and because she could not adapt to the permanent terror of lies in public, political, cultural, and everyday life. She wrote about her experiences of collective nationalist hysteria in her book, The Culture of Lies, and described her personal case in the essay, The Question of Perspective, Karaoke Culture. She continued to write about the dark sides of modern societies, about the homogenization of people induced by media, politics, religion, common beliefs, and the marketplace, Europe and sepia, being the citizen of ruin. She was interested in the complexity of a condition called exile. Her novels, The Ministry of Pain, actually I've heard of that, The Museum of Unconditional Surrender, explore exile traumas, but also excitement of exile freedom. Her essay, Writer in Exile, Thank You for Not Reading, is a small writer's guide to exile. She described herself as a post-Yugoslav, transnational, or even more precisely, post-national. In 2017, she signed the Declaration on the Common Language of the Croats, Serbs, Bosniaks, and Montenegrins. So she sounds like a badass.
Yeah.
I mean, humans are so stupid. It's like, when are we going to figure out that dying for what color your favorite special cloth is just like not cool?
Never.
Yeah, probably never.
Right after it stops becoming profitable.
Right. So, anywho, any news announcements other than the book club? Anything you want to say before we wrap up?
Nope.
Read
Read Hard Rain Falling.
Hard Rain Falling. So I have some announcements. Just some small stuff. Well, it's kind of big. So my plan is for the end of June, by the end of June, to launch our Patreon. What that will include will be a couple really cool things, but one of the things I'm working on is working with our friend Krista, who is a college professor, and we are going to have some guided reading outlines for fiction. So we're going to do a sci-fi module. We're going to do a hidden gems of classic literature module. And we're going to do, I think, women in literature module. Nice. And I'm also currently working on a series of lessons that I'm going to do myself called What Your Teacher Didn't Teach You. And it's going to be geared mostly towards American or North American people who, public education failed them. So I was inspired by this idea because one of the first book reviews I ever did on YouTube was Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee by Dee Brown. The video is not great. I ramble too much. It's very long. You can check that out if you want. It's still up there. But people have commented and said, oh, you inspired me to read this book. And then I realized I didn't know anything about Native American history, and then kind of like went down this rabbit hole of other things. What don't I know about? So I'm going to put together a list of 10 books that I think could really like fill in some big gaps for people who've been educated by the American public education system. And all of these mini courses, if you want to call them that, will have not just like, here's the books you should read, but go over any like prerequisite reading you might want to consider doing, things to look out for as you read, and then kind of like things to reflect on after you finish. So that's cool to have, Krista involved, getting, an actual professional that teaches every day on works of literature. And we're working on a bunch of other cool bonuses for participating in the Patreon. And then I am working on 2 very large projects for the concept of reading one book from every country. You can go on to the website lifeonbooks.com and click the Read the World Project tab and kind of get an inkling of what's going on there. There's a lot of work to be done, but essentially on the website, we're going to have a very well formatted and aesthetically pleasing way to poke around the world, get a little bit of history on writing from every country, and then both recommendations on books that I have either read or plan to read from those countries. And then we're also going to have a space for user submissions. So if people want to make a recommendation, I will also list it there. What I've found when looking at the other resources on the web, people have put together a list of books from every country. They're usually very cluttered. There's not a lot of options. So it's usually just like one book recommendation. And so as of right now, the plan is to have at minimum a recommendation for a modern fiction, a nonfiction work, and a classic from that area. Not possible for every country. Some countries just don't have anything translated into English that fit those categories. And there's so many countries that are just tiny that have, 100,000 citizens. They're just not putting out a lot of writing. But yeah, that's going to be hopefully done by the end of this month as well. And then another even bigger thing related to that, which I can't divulge too much, but that'll be coming up. And I think that might be it.
Sweet.
Yeah. So, as always, we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.